Do we take anybody? Come on in, anybody. Just come on in. Not anymore.
So President Trump signaled very early on in his campaign that he was looking to keep immigrants, particularly illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, out of the country.
The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems.
His first press conference as a candidate for president, he spoke about Mexicans being rapists and thieves and not the kind of people that you would want in this country.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
So that sort of laid the groundwork for what came forward in the 4 years after of a policy that really sought to restrict and to keep out immigrants from Latin America who the administration viewed as being sort of illegitimate claimants of asylum and other and breakers of the system. So historically, right, here in the United States, people from other countries who are trying to get protection have the right to make their petitions in the United States. In this case, that sort of historic norm and legal norm was turned over on its head. And so you had a program like the Migrant Protection Protocols or the Remain in Mexico program. And what that essentially did was folks who were coming from other countries who had who were seeking protection, right, who were seeking refuge, crossed the border, made their petitions, but then were sent back into northern Mexico and some dangerous parts of northern Mexico to wait for a court date. They had to wait in sort of makeshift camps. In Matamoros, for example, at one point there were 3,000 people waiting in tents that were given to them by volunteers, living on top of a levee at the banks of the Rio Grande. The Trump administration moved through a variety of different policies and procedures and rule changes and had the net effect of saying to the rest of the world, particularly Latin America, the United States is not open to you.
Hillary wants a 550% increase in Syrian refugees pouring into our country. And she wants virtually unlimited immigration and refugee admissions from the most dangerous regions of the world to come into our country and to come into Minnesota, and you know it better than anybody.
As a candidate, Donald Trump spoke a lot about Muslims on the campaign trail in 2015, 2016.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
And then he did say explicitly that he was going to implement a Muslim ban, a full-on ban of Muslims.
We have no choice. We have no choice.
So shortly after Trump's inauguration, he came out with an executive order that banned citizens of 7 Muslim-majority countries.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
This executive order in many ways shut down or really severely cut the flow of Muslim refugee arrivals. And so you had this really chaotic scene in the first 24 hours after the ban came out, in which there was a huge amount of confusion about who could travel, who couldn't travel. There were people who had, from these banned countries, who had valid visas, some of whom were already on flights to the United States, who were stopped and sent back. There were people who had green cards. There were airlines who barred people with these nationalities from getting on flights to begin with. And there were chaotic scenes at airports where activists, protesters, attorneys trying to help.
You guys get ready, 14 to go back.
There were lawsuits filed immediately challenging this. Federal judges quickly halted this ban. The administration, in an effort to get the ban to pass muster in these court challenges, fine-tuned it several times. And so ultimately what happened was the Supreme Court allowed a third iteration of the ban to stand.
What that means is that this Supreme Court is upholding the president's travel ban.
The ruling shows that all of the attacks from the media and the Democrat politicians are wrong, and they turned out to be very wrong.
It went into effect, and ultimately a substantial version of it stayed in effect.
This is based on an ideology that says certain people are less valued based on the color of their skin or the religion that they practice or the country where they were born in.
That was probably the moment when I realized that things were going to be really different, and this was right out of the gate, you know.
We start with outrage here in the United States over immigration, the outcry over the separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Became one of the most memorable or infamous parts of the Trump administration's immigration agenda, because it riled up Americans across this country who were asking the question, how could this happen on our watch? You know, how can a country that espouses such high and lofty ideals about protecting people from around the world be complicit in separating children from their parents?
Parents who entered illegally are, by definition, criminals. Illegal entry is a crime as determined by Congress. By entering our country illegally, often in dangerous circumstances, illegal immigrants have put their children at risk. As long as illegal entry remains a criminal offense, DHS will not look the other way.
And so family separation was essentially a policy that took children away from their parents while they were in holding facilities along the border managed by Border Patrol.
Un oficial de inmigración me llamó y me dijo, aquí tenemos a su familia, le vamos a comunicar a su esposa, pero me dicen que me van a separar de los niños.
And that led to long-term estrangement between parents and their children. And what we learned through all of this was that the Trump administration had no plan for reuniting these folks, had not sort of collected enough information to reunite children to their families. And what you had was a situation where children were in shelters across this country by themselves with strangers placed in sometimes with sponsors who were either relatives or someone who said they could care for them, but someone they didn't know. The policy was eventually rescinded because of the backlash. In the end, thousands of children were separated from their parents, and in some cases, in about 500 or so cases, the parents of those children have not been found. And so there are still children in shelters or in homes across this country that have not seen their parents since, the nights that they spent in border holding facilities. I think it's important to remember that the Trump administration carried out what it said it would do, right? And for his followers and for his supporters and Americans who wanted to see more restrictive immigration policies, his administration fulfilled those promises. The question is whether these are things that the American public can continue to abide by. It is something that still fits the values that this country espouses with regards to, the refugee or the migrant seeking protection.